It was a crisp autumn morning in Hawthorne, Alabama. Admiral Omari Drayton, a distinguished officer in the Navy and a man of commanding presence, was driving his sleek black vintage Mustang down Main Street. Omari was a man of stature, exuding an air of respect and authority. His neatly tailored civilian attire, a navy blazer, and khaki trousers looked polished yet understated, making him approachable despite his high rank. Today was one of the Admiral's rare days off, and he planned to surprise his daughter at her high school football game. But as he approached a quiet intersection near the city park, a patrol car suddenly appeared behind him, sirens blaring and shattering the peaceful morning air. Omari glanced in the rearview mirror, noticing the officer gesturing aggressively for him to pull over. Puzzled, he complied, steering his Mustang smoothly to the curb. He remained calm, lowering the window as Officer Slade, a blonde-haired man with a rigid stance and a smug smirk, approached. Slade adjusted his sunglasses before leaning into the car, eyes scanning the interior. "License and registration," he barked, his tone sharp and condescending. "What are you doing driving a car like this in this part of town?" Omari raised an eyebrow, suppressing a smile. Without a word, he handed over his documents, curious to see where this was going. Slade studied them intently, his expression darkening. "This car seems a little too nice for someone like you," Slade emphasized each word with unmistakable insinuation. "You sure it's not stolen?" Admiral Omari Drayton clasped his hands together and rested them on the steering wheel. His composed demeanor starkly contrasted with the officer's hostility as Slade deliberately flipped through his paperwork. "Admiral Nathaniel Drayton," Slade read aloud, his voice laced with skepticism. He looked up, his piercing blue eyes narrowing. "Admiral, huh? What kind of admiral drives around in a vintage Mustang?" He scoffed, his gaze raking over Omari as if searching for a flaw. Omari offered a faint smile, just a slight lift of the corner of his mouth. "One who enjoys restoring classic cars in his free time," he replied. "Is there a problem, officer?" Slade ignored the question, tapping the stack of documents against the roof of the car. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone growing more accusatory. "This isn't a naval base." "To watch my daughter's football game," Omari replied evenly. "She's the team captain." Slade let out a derisive chuckle, shaking his head. "Must be fun, pretending to be someone important," he muttered. "You military guys always think you're untouchable." Omari tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Pretending," he repeated. "I assure you, there's no pretense here." Slade straightened up, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. "Well, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Admiral." He deliberately stretched out the last word, his tone mocking. "Step out of the car." "Step out?" Omari asked, his voice calm but firm. "May I ask why?" "Your license plate looks expired," Slade shot back, barely glancing at it. "That's reason enough. Now step out or I'll pull you out." Omari glanced at his rearview mirror, noting that his plate was intact and the registration sticker was brand new, something Slade had undoubtedly seen as well. Omari's sharp eyes caught the subtle smirk on the officer's lips. This wasn't about the car or the registration. This was about something deeper, something uglier. Rather than argue, Omari simply nodded and opened the door, stepping out with slow, deliberate movements. When he straightened, his imposing height made Slade instinctively take a step back. Omari noticed but said nothing, his expression calm and unreadable. Slade gestured toward the car. "You wouldn't mind if I took a look inside, would you? Anything in there I should know about?" Omari arched an eyebrow. "Like what, officer?" His tone remained steady, carrying a weight that Slade either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. "Oh, I don't know," Slade mused, feigning nonchalance. "Drugs, weapons, stolen goods, you tell me." For the first time, Omari let his smile widen slightly, his gaze locking onto Slade's with an intensity that made the officer hesitate for a fraction of a second. "Be my guest," he said smoothly, "but I suggest you think very carefully before you proceed." Slade hesitated, clearly not expecting such a measured response, but any flicker of doubt was quickly masked by his arrogance. He bent down, rummaging through the car aggressively, flipping through papers, checking each compartment as if he was certain he would find something illegal. Meanwhile, Omari stood calmly on the side of the road, arms crossed, silently observing. He wasn't just looking at Slade, he was assessing him, taking note of every excessive movement, every flicker of unease hidden behind his arrogant facade. Slade pulled out a neatly sealed envelope from the glove compartment, holding it up as if he had just found a crucial piece of evidence. "What's this?" he asked, shaking the envelope like a trophy. Omari glanced at the envelope before turning his gaze back to Slade. "That's a commendation letter from the Secretary of Defense," he said evenly. "Go ahead and read it. It's quite the letter." Slade's sneer faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly regained his composure, carelessly tossing the envelope back into the car. "Yeah, sure," he muttered, feigning disinterest. "You Navy guys always think some fancy title makes you special. Out here, it means nothing." Omari took a step forward, his imposing presence causing Slade to instinctively step back. "You're absolutely right, officer," Omari said, his voice deep yet calm, carrying an air of authority. "Out here, what matters is character, integrity, and the ability to do your job without bias or malice. Would you agree?" Slade narrowed his eyes, his hand unconsciously resting on the grip of his holstered gun. "You trying to lecture me?" he snapped. "Not at all," Omari replied, unfazed by the officer's growing hostility. "I'm simply stating the truth. Just as you're doing your job, I've done mine for nearly 3 decades. That job has taken me across the world leading troops, handling conflicts, and protecting freedom, including yours." Slade's jaw clenched, his confidence wavering under Omari's sharp words. "Sounds nice," Slade muttered, struggling to regain control of the situation. "But I'm the one in charge here." Omari allowed a faint smile. "For now." Slade hesitated, clearly finding nothing illegal, but his eyes remained suspicious as they flicked back to Omari. "You can go," he said begrudgingly. Omari didn't move. "Not so fast. You conducted an unlawful search and have yet to explain why you pulled me over." Slade blinked, momentarily thrown off. You were driving suspiciously." "Suspicious?" Omari arched an eyebrow. "Obeying traffic laws in a well-maintained vehicle?" Before Slade could respond, a sleek black SUV pulled up. A man in a suit stepped out, exuding authority. "Admiral Drayton," the man acknowledged Omari with a firm nod, his voice calm yet commanding. "Is there a problem here?" Slade's face went pale. He stammered, scrambling for a way out. Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced a badge. The gold of the FBI insignia gleamed under the sunlight. "Special Agent Magnus," he stated curtly. "And Officer Slade, you're in serious trouble." Slade's face drained of color, his hands trembling. I was just doing my job," he stammered, his hand nervously twitching near his belt. This man was acting suspiciously. Magnus raised an eyebrow and turned to Omari. "Suspicious?" he echoed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Admiral Nathaniel Drayton, a decorated naval officer, is suspicious?" Slade swallowed hard, his words fumbling. Admiral, I didn't know." "Because you never bothered to ask," Omari interjected. "You just made dangerous assumptions." "I didn't mean anything by it," Slade protested hastily. "You discriminated," Magnus said coldly. "And if you think this is going to be overlooked, you're gravely mistaken." Slade's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. At that moment, a patrol car pulled up. Senior Officer Dorian stepped out, surveying the situation with a sharp gaze. "Slade, step aside immediately," he ordered. Slade hesitated before reluctantly backing away, realizing he had crossed the line. Dorian turned to Omari, his voice tense. "Admiral Drayton, I apologize for this inconvenience. Rest assured we will handle this appropriately." Omari nodded, his expression calm yet resolute. Keeping his voice steady but firm, he said, "Captain, this is more than an inconvenience. Officer Slade conducted an unlawful search, made baseless accusations, and escalated the situation without just cause. That is a violation of protocol." Dorian let out a heavy sigh. "I understand, Admiral. I assure you there will be appropriate disciplinary action." Omari stared at him. "This isn't just about discipline, it's about accountability. Actions like these erode trust in law enforcement." Slade interjected indignantly. I was just doing my job. Enough. Dorian snapped. Step back, or I will suspend you on the spot. Magnus stepped forward, his voice sharp. The entire incident has been recorded and reported to our office as it happened. Slade paled. Recorded? Magnus held up a tablet. It's all here, every word, every action. The crowd murmured, and Slade took a step back, his face draining of color. I didn't know I was being recorded. Magnus smirked. Accountability ensures fairness, and today you'll face the consequences. Dorian shook his head coldly. You brought this on yourself, Slade. Omari remained still, needing no further words. Slade had picked the wrong fight. As Slade's actions became clear, the crowd shifted from murmurs to outright protest. Bystanders raised their phones, capturing everything. Lyric, Omari's daughter, had been passing by on her way to practice when she was swept into the gathering. Seeing her father, she quickly approached, concern in her eyes. Dad, she called out. Omari remained composed. It's okay, sweetheart. I'll explain later. Slade sneered at Lyric, smirking. This your daughter? She must be real proud watching you pull this stunt. Lyric stepped up, unwavering. My dad protects people. What do you do? The crowd erupted in applause, leaving Slade flustered. Agent Magnus addressed the onlookers. Keep recording. Transparency protects the community. Captain Dorian issued an order. Slade, get back in the car. Now. Slade looked like he wanted to argue but was silenced by a sharp glare. Reluctantly, he turned and left amid the cheers of the crowd. Lyric looked at her father with concern. Are you okay? Omari smiled. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just another day, another lesson to be taught. He turned to Dorian and Magnus. Now let's talk about accountability. Dorian reluctantly promised an investigation, but Omari's tone was firm. Empty promises won't restore trust. Magnus interjected. Slade didn't just act improperly, he broke the law. Action needs to be taken immediately. Dorian clenched his jaw. What do you propose, Agent Magnus? I propose Slade be suspended immediately pending investigation. Anything less is a failure of leadership. The crowd murmured, cameras still rolling. Slade stood frozen, his face flushing with shame. Dorian turned to Omari, silently hoping for support. We have procedures to follow. Procedures? Omari said coolly. Slade didn't need time to accuse me. So why do you need time to hold him accountable? Dorian hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. Slade, you're suspended. Hand over your badge and weapon. Now. Slade was stunned. You can't be serious. I am completely serious. Do it now, Dorian barked. The crowd cheered as Slade, seething with anger, unfastened his utility belt. Omari watched with quiet satisfaction. This was only the beginning. He turned to Magnus. What's next? Magnus smiled. We'll make sure this incident doesn't get buried, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on broader reforms. Omari nodded. There's still a lot of work to do. Lyric looked up at her father, curiosity in her eyes. Aren't you angry? If I were you, I'd be yelling right now. Omari crouched down, his voice calm. Anger is easy, but it doesn't always solve the problem. Standing firm and letting the truth speak louder is the best way to fight back. Lyric nodded, absorbing his words. You're so cool, Dad, she said with a bright smile. Omari chuckled, patting her shoulder. You're even cooler. Come on, let's go. Magnus stepped forward, thoughtful. Admiral, you could have used your authority to escalate things, but you didn't. Why? Why? Omari paused, his gaze steady. Because if I lost my temper, I would have only reinforced the narrative people like Slade want to push. But by staying calm, his actions exposed the truth on their own. Magnus nodded, impressed. I'll be quoting you in my next training session. Captain Dorian approached, his voice sincere. I apologize for what happened. Slade's behavior was unacceptable. Omari remained composed. What matters now is what you do next. Dorian sighed. I want to do better, but I don't know where to start. Omari nodded. The first step is acknowledging the problem. The second is listening and learning. I can help connect you with the right people. Dorian looked relieved. I'd appreciate that. Omari smiled. Change doesn't happen overnight, but today you took the first step. Magnus regarded Omari with admiration. Your actions today won't be forgotten. You've set an example. Omari nodded. Leadership isn't about rank, it's about responsibility. And today, my responsibility was to show a better way forward. Lyric leaned against the Mustang, her phone buzzing with nonstop messages from friends. She looked up, her eyes wide with excitement. Dad, you're going viral. Omari smiled. I'm guessing there are a lot of opinions? No, everyone thinks you're amazing. And they say Officer Slade is getting exactly what he deserves. Omari sighed. Lyric, what matters isn't what someone deserves, but doing what's right. She tilted her head. Do you think he'll change? I don't know, Omari admitted. But if we don't try, nothing ever will. Captain Dorian stepped forward. I want to organize a community forum to listen and rebuild trust. Omari nodded. That's a great idea. I'll help you. They shook hands as the crowd applauded in approval. Agent Magnus leaned in and murmured, You may have just started something much bigger. Omari chuckled. Isn't that the goal? As the crowd slowly dispersed, Lyric asked, What now? Omari placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We keep going, one step at a time. Change doesn't happen all at once, but it starts in moments like this. Agent Magnus approached again, his expression serious but with a hint of a smile. Admiral, I've contacted my office. We'll be reviewing Slade's conduct and his unit's policies. But I have a proposal. Would you consider working with us to train law enforcement on leadership and accountability? Omari raised an eyebrow. Rao, you want me to give a speech? Not just a speech, Magnus replied. Today you've shown everyone what leadership under pressure looks like. That's something people need to witness firsthand. Your voice can make a difference. Omari chuckled, glancing at Magnus. What do you think, kid? Should I add public speaker to my resume? Lyric grinned. I think you'd do great. People need to hear what you have to say. He nodded, considering the significance of this opportunity. All right, Magnus, he said firmly. Count me in. If we want to make a difference, I'm ready to do my part. Magnus extended his hand, and Omari took it in a firm handshake, sealing the promise. Good, I'll be in touch soon. As Magnus left, Dorian stepped forward, his expression sincere. Honestly, I didn't expect today to turn out this way, but I'm very grateful for your patience and leadership. You've given me and my department a lot to think about. Omari nodded slightly. It's never too late to change, Captain, but change starts with accountability and action. If you're serious about this, I'll be here to support you. I'm serious, and I'll prove it.